Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 23rd of February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. It's cold, Mike.
Yes.
Global warming.
Yes, indeed. Back in September last year, Theresa May said that modern slavery, Brian, was one of her top priorities.
Oh, housing, no slavery.
Slavery, right? Modern slavery. And so, if you remember, we looked at some statistics and we were making the point that the profit from modern slavery is sitting at around this illegal profits derived from modern slavery sitting at around the £120 billion mark. And at that time, government funding to deal with modern slavery was around £11 million. And we added a little bit to that because we pointed out that £900 million worth of that or so was from from sexual exploitation and government funding there. Well, there wasn't too much for that either. The National Crime Agency saying that modern slavery referrals had gone up 70.7% at that time. We were looking at the various subsections of that, so domestic servitude, labour, organ harvesting, sexual and unknown. So that graph shows that. And if you remember, we overlaid children onto that. So the red bar on the graph there showing that if we look at sexual exploitation, for example, in the context of modern slavery, quite a lot of the abuse of people is people under 17 years of age. Sorry. Well, why are we talking about this? Because on Wednesday, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Alison Saunders, was welcoming attendees from 15 countries to a 3-day summit. It's an international summit to improve the prosecution of modern slavery. I find that title extremely interesting. CPS hosts International Summit to improve the prosecution of modern slavery. It's not to improve the numbers of prosecutions brought about as a result of modern slavery. When you prosecute a cause, Brian,
prosecute a war, yeah,
right. So that headline suggests to me that this is recognised that it's a business. I'll come back to this business that if you look at the drugs trade, for example, there's a veneer of an attempt to prevent the drugs trade, but the financial system benefiting hugely, the government's benefiting hugely from the drugs trade. I believe this is the same business model for human trafficking here. But anyway, Alison Saunders launched this thing on Wednesday, organised by the CPS. It's apparently the first of its kind to be held in the UK. Representatives from countries recognised as the origin of both victims and perpetrators, countries used by traffickers to transit victims, as well as those from the final where people end up. They're going to focus on establishing a strong and active network of prosecutors with the skills and tools to disrupt. And of course, disrupt is a word which is commonly used in modern business parlance as well. So we're right in there. Alison Saunders had this to say: the United Kingdom is well placed to host this landmark summit of experts and legal practitioners, with the Modern Slavery Act globally recognised as a leading example of legislation designed to tackle this inhuman crime. In 2016-2017, the CPS prosecuted 295 defendants for trafficking-related crimes in England and Wales, the highest number ever recorded. Much of our progress in this area depends on quick and seamless communication and information sharing with partners abroad. The fight against modern slavery will only be won with the involvement and engagement of every nation it touches, and we hope this summit will set the agenda for ongoing cooperation between those working to prosecute offending wherever it happens. So, it is a business. It's making huge profits. There's a little bit of money being put into stopping it, apparently. But really all Alison Saunders is worried about is making sure that there's proper data sharing between countries and creating a global network of law enforcement which doesn't enforce anything.
Precisely. The other thing I'd say on this, Mike, is that if they've got such a vast figure, billions of pounds is what's being earned out of this, then there must be a lot of data on the channels through which that money comes. So that's a huge amount of money, therefore there's a huge amount of channels involved in this activity. that would lead you to believe a lot of research has been done to identify those channels, and therefore the prosecution should be breaking apart those channels. But what we've almost got is, well done us, we know the value of this illegal trade. We're now actually going to talk about doing something, but we're not actually doing something because we're making too much money out of it.
Absolutely the case, as with drugs. So Jeremy Wright was also at this conference, and he said tackling modern slavery is a top priority for this government, and the UK is leading the fight internationally. He's, of course, is the Attorney General. And he said prosecutions are increasing year on year, but there's more to do. This summit is a step forward in helping us establish a strong, active international network of prosecutors to help tackle these serious crimes. Now, of course, the government has now decided to put a little bit more money into that. Jeremy Wright was saying that, so let's have a reminder of how much money was being spent last September on this, £11 million. So it doesn't even appear on this graph. So Jeremy Wright has now announced that there'll be £150 million for this. It's going to come from the aid budget. It's being spent on modern slavery, of which 33.5 million is set aside in a modern slavery fund managed by the Home Office, and of that 33.5 million pounds, 11 million pounds has been allocated to an innovation fund to trial new approaches to tackle and reduce prevalence of modern slavery and to identify interventions that could be scaled up. So that's all very encouraging. Not.
Or not?
Yes.
No. Okay, well, let's bring in the subject of child abuse, which follows along, unfortunately, nicely from where we've started. And the BBC here reporting children's rights activist Peter Newell's jailed for abuse. Significance about this man anti-smacking, and his policies actually picked up by the UN. So we're getting a very interesting look now at the charities, how people move between them. But of course, ultimately, the big powerhouse for supposedly protecting children is the UN. I think Gordon Brown went to do something with children or education in the UN. So what is this one about? Well, it says this. In a statement, the Metropolitan Police said Newell's offences, which were reported to it in March 2016, started when his victim was aged 12. The offences took place between 1965 and 68 at a number of addresses and locations in South and East England, including London, and he pleaded guilty on the 2nd of January to 2 charges of serious sexual assault, etc. The Charity Commission said it was informed by Approach about the allegation against Newell in 2016. And we'll just do the other bit here. The Association for the Protection of All Children, or Approach, says its objectives are to prevent cruelty and maltreatment of children and advance public knowledge in the UK and abroad. So we don't know enough about our children, Mike. We need these people to advance it. And we've just taken some of that information and just made it into a graphic because it makes it easier to deal with. His Approach, the Association for the Protection of All Children. They apparently operate through these organisations. Children Are Unbeatable Alliance. I never like these sorts of names too much. And the other one here, the Global Initiative to End All Corporate Punishment of Children. So the man helping to put through the policy was actually abusing youngsters. Nobody knew about this, of course, and there's no suggestion the charity knew. Nobody knew. Then the money that's been coming into this organisation, we've got all the usual names here. So we've got Bernardo's, we've got UNICEF itself, NSPCC, we've got Save the Children. And I've said this is a sweetie shop for abusers, and I'm going to stand by that because, of course, we have these vast organisations drawing in vast numbers of highly vulnerable children. That is the place that you would expect the child abusers to be. And we're now starting to see that coming up to the surface. But we'll add this one with it because we've got another resignation here. And this is Justin Forsyth resigns in wake of complaints dating from his time as boss of Save the Children. So UNICEF taking a hit here. And it's quite interesting what this man has to say. I want to make clear I'm not resigning from UNICEF because of the mistakes I made at Save the Children. They were dealt with through a proper process many years ago. I apologised unreservedly at the time, and face to face, I apologise again. And he went on to say this: there's no doubt in my mind that some of the coverage around me is not just to rightly hold me to account, but also to attempt to do serious damage to our cause and the case for aid. I'm resigning because of the danger of damaging both UNICEF and Save the Children and our wider cause, two organisations I truly love and cherish. I can't let this happen. Now, the accusations against this man were to do with grown women. It was nothing to do with children. He said that it was all dealt with some time ago, but Save the Children have indicated that actually they've had to sort of admit it wasn't fully investigated at the time, and they've apologised. But one of our viewers contacted us a few days ago, and he said, isn't it interesting that we've suddenly got this massive attack on these aid agencies, children's agencies? Has it got anything to do with the fact that they have started to reveal how relatively few people control immense power in wealth and also are controlling huge sections of the media? And I'm going to say, Mike, I found that a very interesting analysis. Next week we'll have a look at some of the revealing that these organisations have done. But could it be that we've got two things going on here? Yes, we've got child abusers who've wheedled their way into these organisations, which is literally a vast sweetie shop. But accepting that in any organisation we've still got some good people, could it be they've been getting a bit close to the truth about the international power base?
Okay, today the Organ Donation Deemed Consent Bill is having its second reading in Parliament. This was tabled by Geoffrey Robinson MP after coming sixth in the private members' bill ballot in a parliamentary session. Now, there are many private members' bills put in, and quite often we get emails from people asking if we've seen one or other of the private members' bills that have gone through. And without government backing, they generally don't progress terribly far. But this bill has had government backing. Because Theresa May announced that the government would introduce an opt-out consent scheme for organ donation in England in October last year, and in December there was a consultation document published which sought views on the change. So Geoffrey Robinson, having launched this bill, was speaking in Parliament this morning. Up to 500 lives could be saved, is what he was saying. He said that there are 25 million people on the organ donation register and 6,500 people waiting for a transplant. This is not good enough. 25 million people out of a population of 65 million people, I think, is a pretty good proportion. So, okay, we're going to potentially double the number of people, assuming that people don't attempt to opt out. Is that going to have a massive effect on 6,500 people waiting for a transplant? I don't know.
Well, it's an amazing mismatch between those two figures, on a purely efficiency analysis.
It absolutely is. So this is a private members' bill, as we say. Now, look, in principle, I don't have any. I'm in favour of organ donation if it's going to solve or save a life, or going to make somebody's life worth living. But the question is the issue of informed consent. And so I want to highlight again this article on the UK Column website that was published a couple of weeks ago, No Time to Die. And I do encourage everybody to read this. It's a very measured article. It's written by a doctor, and he is making some very salient points on the issue of consent and people's understanding of what happens when organs are harvested, and I do encourage people to read that because this should form an informed debate, and I don't believe the debate is an informed debate at this point. It's an emotional debate.
Yeah, I think we're allowed to say the key thing in this article that really makes you think is the question: are you brain dead are you no longer sensing any form of pain when these organs are harvested? And the evidence being brought forward in this article is that that is certainly not always the case, because the industry requires the organs to come from a live body, and hence there is a conundrum here. But this is very heavy stuff, it's very serious stuff, but people who are pro-organ donation, maybe you're carrying around a card saying you're a willing donor, you need to read this article so that you are fully informed as to what the real risks are.
But I'll leave it to Boris Johnson for the final word. I don't think there's any comment needed on this tweet that he's put out this morning. I'll just leave it to everybody to decide for themselves. He says, a big thank you to Dr. Akbarov, head of organ transplants in Uzbekistan, for his generous gift. It really was the most delicious steak and kidney pie I've ever had. Hashtag organ donation.
Yeah.
Yes.
This man is I think he's sick. I think he's a very, very dangerous man. Plays the buffoon a lot of the time, but behind it, I think there's a very, very dark personality.
Okay, let's move on to Brexit then. Jeremy Hunt, the Health Secretary, was talking about Brexit this morning. He was saying there was no possibility that the government would be staying within a customs union after Brexit. He said that the UK wanted frictionless trade. He wanted to, but that the government would find a different way to achieve that. He was speaking on BBC Radio 4's Today programme this morning. He said, you have divergent views on a big issue like Brexit, as you would expect, but the central common understanding is that there will be areas and sectors of industry where we agree to align our regulations with European regulations. The automotive industry perhaps is an obvious example, but because of supply chains that are integrated, but it will be on a voluntary basis. We will, as a sovereign power, have the right to choose to diverge, and what we won't be doing is accepting changes in rules because the EU unilaterally chooses to make those changes. So perhaps the government being forced to move in a certain direction at the moment, or perhaps this is more obfuscation. In the meantime, Anna Soubry MP has apparently launched a new amendment to the trade bill, which is encouraging the government to form a customs union, even if the government isn't going to be in the customs union. Let's have a customs union, she says. And she says there's gaining cross-party support from Labour Party and so on. But you know, what's this all about? Well, of course, yesterday Theresa May had her Brexit war cabinet at Chequers, and the message that has come out of that, as was echoed by Jeremy Hunt, as was talking about a few seconds ago, is that divergence has won. So divergence doesn't mean leaving. It means that in some areas, as Jeremy Hunt expressed, in some areas we diverge and in others we don't. Well, this is exactly the model that we were talking about with Best of Both Worlds. Opt in and opt out, and opt into some stuff, opt out of others.
Indeed. That photograph is particularly scary, Mike. While it was on screen, I was having a closer look on my own monitor here, and we are silly enough to allow those individuals to be ruling our lives and our country. It's truly scary as we begin to sort of lift the covers off these people.
It is appalling, isn't it? And the fact that anybody trusts them to
tell the truth or be really acting in our best interests. Who are these people and what are their values? I do not believe that they are British in the widest sense. I don't believe that they hold any of the normal values in this country. They are something else. They're working for other interests, and I think overwhelmingly they're not to be trusted, my personal opinion. Well, thank you very much to the lady who said we ought to have a little look at EU business, because it has got some things to say, particularly if in the future we're Brexit. How does it go without the Brexit, without the exit?
Yeah,
so we're in, but we're coming out while we're still in. And she said, you need to have a look at this because it's the EU talking about the funding of political parties, and it's getting quite interesting. EU ambassadors agreed Wednesday on revised rules for the funding of European political parties and foundations, enabling the Bulgarian presidency to begin negotiations with the European Parliament. That's a fascinating mixture, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the changes target a number of abusive practices, such as the creation of artificial entities to receive funds from the EU budget. Of course, that's the EU budget that to date has never been fully audited and signed off as audited. The amended rules also ensure a fairer allocation of resources and allow for stronger enforcement in cases of fraud, except, of course, when OLAF decides it's going to prevent cases of fraud being fully exposed. This is a timely proposal which will help make sure that EU taxpayers' money is used for the intended process. So let's see what it went on to say. The Council supports revising the conditions for forming European political parties so that only national parties and no longer individuals can sponsor their creation. The aim is to make sure that such parties have a genuine European dimension with true representation in at least a quarter of the member states. So here we've got the organisation of the EU itself increasing its control of political parties, and you're certainly not going to be creating a party as an individual. It's got to be born out of a party already created, and if it's the Conservative Party, for example, that party is going to be controlled by the whips, and we know from Tim Fortescue of 1973-74 that they were using child abuse to help control the whip, to control the party members. So the lady who sent this through to us said, isn't this interesting that as UK is admitting we are going to continue to be locked into the European Union processes, here is the EU starting to put more control over political parties. And we better bring in the Brexit, or not Brexit, or the Remain, in fact, Battle Bus. The Sun is one of the papers that's covered its launch. It's had a few problems, Mike, because it's very long, and this has meant that it has been stuck in some of the London streets.
Oh.
But there we go. But that's the bus, and it says on it, Brexit to cost 2,000 million a week. Now, somebody said that they'd sent a letter to the Daily Mail, Express and Times, and this is what the letter says. Dear Sir, the anti-Brexit battle bus claims that Brexit will cost us 2,000 million per week. It also asks, is it worth it? Whilst I do not for one moment believe their figure, they should know that Professor Tim Congdon calculated that for 2014, being in the EU cost our economy 185 billion per annum. This works out at 3,560 million a week. Hence, the answer to the question on the battle bus must be a resounding yes, as based on their figure, Brexit is obviously going to save us at least 1,560 million a week. Perhaps they should do everyone a favour and put the right answer to their question on the battle bus. So somebody pretty astute on the figures, but we're now seeing the desperation, Mike, to make sure that there's definitely no exit in Brexit. What's happening in UK? Many people are talking to us about the immense power of the state, the increasing power of the state. We, of course, have been talking for years about the British state literally stealing people's children, but we're now getting to a whole new stage. And let's just go back to have a look at this Daily Mail article. This was actually talking about a mother taken away from her daughter's care because the local authority decided they didn't think what the daughter was doing was correct. The daughter said, I can't believe they brought a battering ram. They use them to break into drug dens, not to cart off little old ladies. So social services turned up with the police with their battering ram in order to drag this lady out of a purpose-built room which the daughter had made so that she could care for her mother. And the daughter had given up a professional career. Now, the lady did eventually get her mother back, but even the Daily Mail, by the depth of this article, was shocked as to what went on.
Now, just to clarify, that was 2009, so this stuff has still been going, right?
Oh, this stuff is going on, but now it's gone to a very dangerous level because we have this organisation, Mike. We've got the Office of the Public Guardian, and I'm going to say, if you do not know what this organisation is, you need to know. You need to go and look at it. I've said, meet the office with the power to take your relative away from your care at any time, and that is exactly right. Even if you think you are secure because you've got a power of attorney to look after an aged relative, for example, you are not safe from this organisation. So what can we say about them? Well, the Office of the Public Guardian supposedly protects people in England and Wales who may not have the mental capacity to make certain decisions for themselves, such as about their health and finance. We're also here to help people plan ahead for someone to make certain important decisions for them, should they become unable to do so because they lack mental capacity. And this is getting into the heart of it. We support the Public Guardian in carrying out the legal functions of the Mental Capacity Act 2005. We'll come on to that a little bit in a moment, but let's bring this in. What are they responsible for? Taking action where there are concerns about an attorney or deputy, registering lasting enduring powers of attorney so that people can choose who they want to make decisions for them, maintaining public register of deputies and people who've been given lasting and enduring powers of attorney, tracking people, Mike. Yeah. This is tracking people, supervising deputies appointed to the Court of Protection, making sure that they carry out their work in line with the Mental Capacity Act, and looking into reports of abuse against registered attorneys or deputies. And then it says our current priorities is to understand our customers better. So the language of this organisation is business language. What are they doing? This is the state saying we can have absolute control over any of your relatives, that we deem we need to take that control, even if you've taken power of attorney and said, well, I've now got power to make the decisions for my vulnerable father or mother. The state can step in, take the relative, place them where they think they should be placed. They can then take all property and they can take every penny that is in any bank account connected with that elderly relative. And if you think you're understanding this, stay with it, because the punchline is yet to come. So have a look at that Mental Capacity Act. Here it is. This is legislation.gov.uk, but you can find it there and get a lot of information on it. So it talks about who the people are who lack capacity, the inability to make decisions, and then it talks about powers of attorney and more powers and other powers in immense detail. We'll have a look at... sorry, Mike.
Oh, go ahead.
We'll have a look at this video where a gentleman from the office itself is talking about... this is the Public Guardian, is talking about his business.
The key thing about Agile is it not only puts the customer in the heart of what we're doing, but actually puts the customer in the place of driving development. It's about breaking down those customer expectations into small chunks so you can just deliver something that they've asked for really quickly. You can say, is this what we expected? Is this what you were looking for? It's open, it's transparent. The 2-weekly sprint and the continual iteration of what we're doing has worked particularly well. That's helped us to see a product emerging and for us to be able to shape it with the developers. And we've moved from process to customer outcomes. So we no longer measure how quickly we move the piece of paper, but we measure what the impact is on the customer. doing something in an agile way doesn't mean you've thrown governance out the window. In fact, I feel that I've got more control over an agile development because I see what is being done, or have the potential to see what's being done once a fortnight. I can say whether I like it or not, and I can stop things really quickly if they're not going right. I've had to learn a whole new language about discovery, alpha, beta, live, Scrum. So it's learning what that actually means in practice and bringing it alive to other people. It's changed the language of the organisation. It's quite interesting just to overhear conversations even in the office for people who aren't in the digital team, talking about, well, before we start off on this project, what's the minimal viable product here we want to deliver, and also people talk about iterating customer delivery and services and processes. So it's got into the psyche.
Well, there we are. What a fascinating little video clip. Let's remember that the job of this organisation is to protect immensely vulnerable individuals. But the language coming out of this man is nothing to do with compassion and love and nurturing of those vulnerable people. It's an IT language. Several people in our chat box have pointed out that this is an IT development framework that's been in place for quite some years. But the language of this man is IT. It is nothing to do with the loving care of human beings. But if you picked up about in the middle of that video, he talked about his organisation being open and transparent. Well, let's have a look at how open and transparent it is, because we were stunned to learn late last night that if you actually go to the office for public guardianship, you will find that the office address is actually a PO box. And we have had a case brought to us in the last couple of days where a family is receiving calls from an individual who says, I'm calling on behalf of the public guardian, and we don't like the way you're looking after your relative. You need to be talking to us. I'd like to know details of your bank accounts. And if you don't do what I say, then we're going to go to court to get your power of attorney away. So this family already got power of attorney to look after an elderly relative. A man calling from a PO box address who will not give his official public identity and will not give the proper postal address of the office in which he's working, is demanding intimate details, including details of bank accounts. Now, one or two people have commented on this in the chat box saying this is scary. This is unbelievably serious because ultimately this office, working from a postbox address, is capable of taking any relative away, complete with their house and all their assets.
Let's assume for a second somebody ends up working for this organization or subcontracted to this organization and perhaps has their own agenda and wants to seize assets for themselves, perhaps. Where does somebody go in the event that they have a complaint to make or they want the organization itself investigated?
Well, a very interesting question, Mike. We did speak to the OPG this morning. In order to ask them part of that question, of course, they do run a complaints department, but the complaints department itself is behind this firewall of no address. So you are dealing with anonymous people who say they're there to look into your complaint as supposedly independent investigators, but you don't even know where the office is from which they're working. I have to say that the gentleman who was kind enough to speak to me from the OPG this morning, when I put it to him that people found it very unnerving to be dealing with a government department that didn't have a proper postal address, he more or less indicated, yes, I can understand that, but nevertheless, that is the case. So, Mike, where do you go? of course, who's responsible for this overall? It's the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Justice is the man with overall responsibility, but a department of the British government that does not actually exist in the sense that it doesn't have an address. Just very, very dangerous, in my opinion. And we'll try and give you more information on the case that we're able to track that's having trouble with this organisation as we can.
Right. Royal Bank of Scotland released its full year results today, and apparently it's made a profit, first profit since the crash. But unfortunately, its subsidiary, Ulster Bank Group, has not made a profit and in fact has lost about £133 million in 2017. So as a result of that, they are about to sell around 7,000 mortgages. These are so-called non-performing loans. A non-performing loan, of course, is one where it's either in default or close to being in default. So the people that owe the money haven't kept up their payments for at least 90 days. So 7,000 of these loans they're going to attempt to sell those on the markets. Permanent TSB in Ireland has already tried to do this with 18,000 home loans and hasn't been able to sell them to date. But Jerry Mallon, who's Ulster Bank's CEO, said part of our strategy and one of the things we've made an adjustment in our accounts for is the fact that we reckon that a loan sale is one of the things we'll have to deploy, and it could be approximately a third of the overall non-performing loan book. Now, of course, once they sell those, the pressure on the homeowners is only going to increase, and you're probably going to see many more repossessions as a result. This is typical of the bank. They aren't prepared to stand by their customers, and they wanted to get shot of this debt as quickly as possible. Now let's move on to Syria just briefly. I just was absolutely gobsmacked by this article in the Daily Mail today. The headline is Assad using napalm on his own people? Rescuers claim the banned weapon is being used to incinerate hell on earth rebel-held Syrian town. Now, who are the rescuers? Well, of course, that's the White Helmets. But it's the timing that fascinates me more than anything else. Because here we are, we're about to have a vote in the United Nations on whether to take any action in Syria. And here we get the old rhetoric of napalm rolled out once again, because, of course, coincidentally, back in 2013, when the UK government was about to vote on whether to take action in Syria, the BBC produced its panorama documentary, Saving Syria's Children, which alleged napalm use in Syria. This was just a coincidence that this raises its head whenever there's going to be some kind of vote. And if anybody hasn't had a look at Robert Stewart's fantastic website on this, search with your favourite search engine for Fabrication in BBC Panorama Saving Syria's Children, and you'll see the evidence which suggests that the BBC completely faked that documentary from start to finish. Are these new allegations fake? I think they are.
Okay, well, if the BBC is busy attacking Assad and telling other countries how to sort themselves out, one thing it isn't doing is fully investigating what's happening in UK. BBC News, Met Police has child protection weaknesses. It's just a few weaknesses, Mike.
Oh, really?
Nothing really to bother about. But the meat of this story is the latest HM Inspectorate of Constabulary report about the police. It's saying that, it's inspected the force, is talking about Met 4 times since a damning report in November 2016. The new report found that while the Met has made progress, consistently good outcomes for children are not achieved. To me, that reads as though they're failing.
Yeah, it does.
Yes,
yeah,
okay, good. During the latest inspection, HMIC rated 191 of a sample of 214 child protection cases as either requiring improvement or inadequate.
Well, the Met has made progress in the meantime?
Yes, well, the original report was very scathing, Mike, and basically said that, I'm going to use the word shambles, but let's have a look at a bit more here. It says the Met had made drastic alterations and by and large the force is moving in the right direction. This is all reassuring Newspeak language. It's moving in the right direction. However, he said the force must maintain its momentum and focus on ensuring the changes it is making are leading to a better service. So there's no substance here, there's no meat, there's no teeth, there's no action.
But if 80% of your cases are failing, it doesn't fit with this rhetoric at all, does it?
Well, I was just intrigued that this is Matt Parr, the man who's been leading this excellent work. And I was just fascinated to see that he's a former Royal Navy submariner, Rear Admiral, member of the Navy board. So we've got this supposedly very dynamic and capable man who's come in, who's presided over what is a report that's so wishy-washy. If I'm sure one of his junior officers had presented him a report like this, he would have torn it up and sent him away. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I was interested enough to give them a call this morning and to ask if HM Inspectorate of Constabulary was aware of John Wedger, the detective constable blowing the whistle on child abuse. Were they aware of John Wedger and his exposure, what he talked about, his testimony when they produced the report? I got a very polite but not very well informed media man speaking to me. He wasn't sure. So we sent them this email, which I thought we'd bring up on screen so that people can freeze it. Further to my call to the media team this morning, please find links to the 2 interviews with former Met Detective Constable John Wedger. So we sent those over to the Inspectorate of Constabulary. We reminded them of what the headlines were around the Met Police and child protection issues, significant weaknesses, and then we asked them 3 questions. Can the Inspectorate please confirm that during their latest inspection they were fully aware, so they should be aware, they were fully aware of the appalling treatment of Detective Constable Wedger, and that they took on board his evidence as to the abuse of power within the Met to silence his personal testimony and whistleblowing. So we're asking them, when you produced this report, were you aware of John Wedger? If they were not aware of his testimony, why were they not aware of this case against the Met Police? And the final one is, now certainly knowing about his testimony, what action is Matt Parr going to take to address Mr. Wedger's evidence in light of their recent findings? So that's all gone off. We're awaiting the response. It will be very interesting to see what they do, Mike.
Yes.
The initial response from this organisation was to say, it's not really us, it's the independent Police Complaints Commission who surely would be responsible for this. We only do the sort of management flows within the Met.
But John Wedger's treatment is as a result of management flows within the Met?
I did point that out, Mike, and they seem to be a little bit embarrassed.
Oh.
Okay, so we'll wait to see what the outcomes are. Now, I would just like to say, if you are a full-time follower of UK Column News, we do cover a lot of material which is very dark, it's very heavy. We know that some people are now seeing the picture and starting to say some of this is very scary. I'd just like to say a little phrase really from Robert Greene, who says, don't worry about the scariness, get out there and lift the stones, because if you lift the stones, shine a light on these individuals and their organisations, what you find is that they are desperate to scurry away and hide. So do not be frightened of these organisations, lift the stones, challenge them with telephone calls, emails, tweets, visits, letters. But of course, as we always say, act reasonably in the material that you send to them, politely and reasonably. It will simply be the lifting of the stone that does the damage to them. So we'll leave you with that very positive thought. And if anybody's wondering where David Scott is today, we normally have David reporting from north of the border. He's been a little bit poorly over the last few days. So David, if you're listening, we hope you're feeling better. And we look forward to getting you live with the UK column as soon as possible. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.